What did people eat in Jesus' time is one of the most searched questions about the ancient world. And the answer will completely change how you read every meal scene in the entire Bible. The food in the Bible is not background detail. It is cultural information and understanding what Jesus ate and what the disciples ate and what the people around them ate changes the meaning of almost every meal in the New Testament. Most people imagine the biblical world through the lens of modern food. They picture abundance, variety, choice. But the daily diet in ancient Israel was built on 6 things and almost nothing else. This is what did people eat in Jesus' time, answered not from a theology textbook, but from archaeology, from first-century written records, and from the food remains that have been found in ancient Israelite homes. And some of what they found will genuinely surprise you. Bread was not a side dish in the ancient world. It was the meal. The biblical diet was built on bread, the way no modern diet is built on any single food. And the bread Jesus ate looked nothing like anything in a modern bakery. First-century bread was made from barley for the poor and wheat for those who could afford it. Ground by hand on a stone saddle quern. The grinding was women's work. It happened every single morning. And the sound of grinding stones was so common that silence meant catastrophe. When Jesus said, "Give us this day our daily bread," the word he used in Aramaic was the word for tomorrow's bread, the bread you grind and bake today so you can eat tomorrow. It was a prayer about survival, not abundance. The feeding of the 5,000 involved 5 barley loaves, not wheat. Barley, the cheapest grain available, the grain of the poor, and that detail is not accidental. It is telling you exactly who was in that crowd. If bread was the foundation of the biblical diet, then olive oil was the liquid running through everything. Cooking oil, lamp fuel, medicine, skin care, religious ritual. The olive tree was not a food source in ancient Israel. It was the infrastructure of daily life. Olive oil was so central to the ancient Israelite economy that it was used as currency, paid as taxes to Rome, traded across the Mediterranean. Stored in massive clay amphora as a commodity, the olive harvest was the most important agricultural event of the year. When the parable of the 10 virgins talks about lamps running out of oil, every person listening to that parable felt that in their body. Running out of oil was not an inconvenience. It was darkness. It was cold. It was the end of the working day. It was a household crisis. Fish was the primary protein source for most people in first-century Israel. Fresh fish from the Sea of Galilee for those who lived near it. Dried and salted fish everywhere else. And the fish market at Magdala on the western shore of Galilee was one of the largest fish processing centers in the Roman world. The disciples were not romantic fishermen. They were working-class tradesmen operating in a taxed and regulated industry. Their catch was weighed, taxed, sold to processors, and most of the profit went to Rome. Fishing on the Sea of Galilee in the 1st century was not freedom. It was economic servitude. When the risen Jesus appeared on the shore of Galilee and cooked fish on a charcoal fire for the disciples, that specific detail, a charcoal fire, fish cooking, was not random. It was the most ordinary breakfast scene imaginable for men who had grown up on that lake, and that ordinariness was the point. Here is something about the biblical diet that changes how you read the entire New Testament. Clean drinking water was not reliably available in the 1st century ancient world, and wine was not a luxury. It was the safe alternative to water that would make you sick. The wine Jesus and the disciples drank was not the wine of modern wine culture. It was heavily diluted with water, thick, dark, closer to a fermented grape concentrate. And when Paul tells Timothy to drink a little wine for his stomach, the medical recommendation makes complete sense in a world where the water made people ill. The miracle at Cana, where Jesus turned water into wine, was not a party trick. In the 1st century, running out of wine at a wedding was a social catastrophe that shamed the host family, and Jesus produced somewhere between 100 and 150 liters of it from 6 stone water jars. Figs, dates, pomegranates and grapes were the fruit of ancient Israel. Not exotic, not occasional. They were the daily sweetness of the biblical diet, and they appear throughout the Old and New Testament for a reason. They were everywhere. They were affordable, and they carried enormous cultural meaning. When Jesus cursed the fig tree for having no fruit, the disciples were shocked, because fig trees were considered the most reliable food source in ancient Israel. A fig tree with no fruit was not just unusual, it was a statement, and Jesus was using it as one. Lentils, beans, and chickpeas were the protein of the everyday meal. The red lentil stew that Esau sold his birthright for was not a delicacy. It was the most ordinary thing imaginable, the equivalent of a bowl of plain rice, which makes Esau's decision even more devastating. Honey was the sweetener of the ancient world. Wild honey from rock hives in the Judean wilderness, cultivated honey from clay hive vessels. And when the promised land is described as flowing with milk and honey, that was not poetic language. It was a description of agricultural prosperity, visible in 2 specific products. The Last Supper was a Passover Seder, and the Passover meal was the most precisely specified meal in the entire Jewish calendar. Every item on the table had a meaning and a history and a specific preparation, and understanding the food on that table changes everything about what Jesus was saying when he picked up the bread. The bitter herbs on the Passover table were not a garnish. They were horseradish or romaine lettuce, so bitter they brought tears. They were eaten deliberately to make the person eating them physically experience the bitterness of slavery. Jesus ate them that night. When Jesus took the bread, broke it, and said, "This is my body," every person at that table knew exactly what bread meant. It was survival. It was daily dependence. It was the thing you ground and baked before sunrise so you could eat tomorrow. And he said, "This is my body, broken for you," using the most essential food in the ancient world. The food in Jesus' time was not abundant. It was not varied. It was not chosen. It was survival food, peasant food, the food of an occupied people living in a harsh climate. And every time Jesus used food as a metaphor, he was using something his audience felt in their stomach every single day. Every story in this Bible has a version nobody told you. Subscribe, because we are just getting started.